welcome back to another video by View Systems. In this video, we're going to go over how to create AML aggregate rules. The first thing we're going to do is go to the left menu bar at the bottom and find AML aggregate rules. And we're going to create a new rule here. Before we create a new rule, I would just like to point out that the order of these rules do matter, and later we will see why that is the case. Now, what is the purpose of this module? Say we want to create a rule that will report large transactions, and in this case, that could be a value of greater than 10,000, for example. So let's create a rule that will report large cash transactions. Now, here at the top here is where we will identify the name of this rule. So here, let's say LCT, which stands for large cash transactions. And here we will need a description of the rule. Now let's go through and set this rule. So for the criteria and conditions, we're going to say rule applies to single invoice only. Now what this means is before saving an invoice, this rule will kick in. We don't necessarily need to set the number of days for this rule, so we're just going to leave the from and to date blank here. The next thing we're going to check off is received incoming large cash transactions. However, note that when there's a check mark, this is indicating that we are receiving. When it is a dot, we are going to indicate that this is a paid large cash transaction. And the empty indicates that it can be either. In this case, we're going to check this as received. And we're also going to check cash only, since this is a rule for a large cash transaction. So notice here how we have three different values. We have an if amount, we have an if transaction value, or an if value LC. Now for this particular example, we're going to focus on the value. Now what value means here is it's comparing this transaction to a market rate value. And that's typically more common for these kinds of rules. However, if you wanted to compare this to your specific rate, you may set a volume. However, again, we're going to focus on the transaction value here. So here we are going to say if transaction value is greater or equal to 10,000. And you may indicate an upper bound, but it's not necessarily required. The number of transactions means the number of invoices, so in this case we can leave it blank since we're only dealing with one invoice. Now the next section is the scope. This typically means who do you want this rule to apply to. Now in this scenario we typically wouldn't want a walk-in, so we are just going to say no to walk-in. And again, just as an indication, when you have a check mark, it indicates that this is a required field. And if we click it again and there is a dot, that means that we do not want this rule to apply to walk-in customers. Insiders are for those who are working within the company. So again, if that applies to you or not, we can give that a check. And for company, it's really up to you if you would like to report companies or not. So in this case, we'll just give it a check. And for the high risk, we can either say it is a high risk for a check mark. The dot indicates that is a non-risk, and the empty can be all. So it can either be a high risk or a non-high risk. And again, it's up to you how you'd like to customize this rule. And same goes for suspicious. Now, the customer ID field here is meant for situations like, say if there's a specific customer that you do not want to do transactions with. This is the field where you would indicate that. This also applies to a group of customers or an occupation, say if any customer who is a realtor. And we also have an industry code, a nationality code. I think industry code deals with them separately, and we will leave relation type for now. And now moving forward to the KYC requirements. Now these are just basic KYC customer requirements, so you may want an picture ID, an occupation, date of birth, social insurance number, an address, and again, any information that is required. I'm pretty much just going to check all of these for now. Now, I'd just like to point out that for these fields, it's the similar procedure that when there is a check mark, it indicates that it's required, and a dot indicates that it's not mandatory. However, for this section, if it is not filled in, it will throw a warning at you. So here we're just going to put a dot anywhere that it is not required. Okay, now to the EDD requirements. Now this is part of the invoice at time of the transaction. So here we're just going to check off maybe purpose of transaction, source of funds. Now in Canada, we typically check for third-party determination or ask for a PEP determination. Now moving on to the actions, a display warning is just a warning message that you would like to show regarding this rule when it's applied. And then we have a require manager's approval or require approval by email. Again, that's up to you. I will just give them a check for this example. Now for generate AML alert. Now we generally want this because this will generate a record in the AML alerts module, which are specific to AML and not related to rates or operations. And then for here, I'm just going to check a flag invoice and set LCT flag. And then we have a mark transaction to be reported field. And that just means that this transaction must be reported in X amount of days. So here we can even just say a value of 3, for example. We then have a tag customer option, and this is kind of like a hashtag that gets linked to the customer. For example, you may tag the customer as high risk when XYZ happens, and several tags can be set to one customer. For the execute section, this is when you want the system to execute a particular function. This could be, for example, sending an email to management. Now this is more for customization purposes. If additional features are required, this is where we would add it. Now if you don't want any further rules to be run, you just click on the stop evaluating rules for it to stop completely. Now once you've set up the rule, you're going to want to activate this rule at the top corner and then save the rule. Are you sure you want to save? Yes. And now if we scroll to the bottom here, we should see that LCT has been saved to our list of rules. And now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to actually test these rules in your system to ensure that they are working. Hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. We will see you in the next video.